Bitcoin lost 80% of its value while I was holding it. Not 30%, not 50, 80. And I did not sell. Not once. But it cost me more than I expected. I'm Sats. And this is what holding through an 80% crash actually feels like from the inside. Let me be specific about the timeline, because the shape of an 80% drawdown is not what most people imagine. Most people picture a crash as a sudden event, a cliff. One terrible week and then you are at the bottom and you know where you stand. That is not what an 80% drawdown feels like. What it feels like is a slow, grinding decline that lasts for months. A series of smaller drops, each one followed by a small recovery that gives you hope, and then another drop that takes you lower than before. The bottom does not announce itself. You do not know you are at the bottom until the price has already started coming back. I was down 20%. That was manageable. I had read about this. I was down 35%. Uncomfortable, but within the range I had prepared for intellectually. I was down 50%. And this is where it stopped feeling theoretical. This is where the reading stopped helping. Not because the arguments for holding were wrong, because knowing something intellectually and living inside it are completely different experiences. I knew the history. I knew about previous crashes. None of that knowledge was accessible in the way I needed it. I was down 65%. At this point, I had stopped telling people the price. Not because they asked, because the number had become something I was managing privately. A thing I carried that nobody else could see. I was down 80%. I want to stop at that number for a moment, because I think it is important to say what 80% actually means when it is real. If you put in $10,000, you are looking at $2,000. The argument for selling at this point is not irrational. It is actually quite reasonable. You might lose the remaining 20%. You would at least have something. The case for holding is not obvious when you are standing inside the loss. It requires a level of conviction that most people do not discover they do not have until they are tested by the real thing. Here's what I actually did during those months. Not what I wish I had done. What I actually did. I checked the price less and less. Not because I had developed discipline, because each check made me feel worse without giving me any new information, and at some point the self-preservation instinct kicked in, and I just stopped opening the app as often. I did not tell my partner the exact number we were down, because I did not want to have that conversation. I told myself this was protecting them. It was also protecting me from having to say it out loud. I read things that confirmed my position. That is the honest version. I sought out the arguments that said this had happened before, that the fundamentals had not changed, that the people who sold at the bottom of previous cycles had regretted it. I needed to believe those arguments, so I found them and I read them and I used them to get through another week. I had one specific moment where I was genuinely going to sell. Not a general sense of wanting to. A specific evening, a specific number, a specific decision point. I sat in front of the screen for about 20 minutes. I did not sell. Not because of conviction, because I could not bring myself to lock in a loss that felt final in a way that just holding did not. And this is the closest I came to selling, a real decision, not a feeling. That is the honest reason, not wisdom, not strategy. The psychological difference between an unrealized loss and a permanent one. Here is what happened on the other side. And I want to say this carefully because I do not want it to sound like a happy ending that validates every decision I made. The price recovered. It went higher than where I had bought. The 80% drawdown that had felt like it might be permanent turned out to be another cycle in a pattern that has repeated since Bitcoin began. I was not right. I just didn't sell. But I want to be honest about what I know and what I do not know. I held through that crash and it worked out. That is true. What I cannot tell you is whether it would have worked out if I had bought later in that cycle, or if I had bought a different asset, or if the circumstances of my life had made it necessary to access that money. The people who sold at the bottom did not all make a mistake. Some of them needed the money. Some of them were in assets that never recovered. Survivorship bias is real. I survived. Not everyone who held did. What I can tell you is what holding through an 80% drawdown actually requires. Not the intellectual position, the lived experience. It requires accepting, really accepting, not just saying it that the money you put in might not come back, that you are holding a position that could go to zero, that the history of recovery is not a guarantee of future recovery. If you can genuinely accept that and still hold, then holding is the right decision for you. If you cannot, no amount of reading about Bitcoin cycles will get you through it. The 80% drawdown did not break me, but it broke plenty of things I thought I believed about my own risk tolerance. And that gap between what you think you can handle and what you actually can, that is the most important thing to understand before you buy. Before you go, here is what to take away. An 80% drawdown is not a cliff. It is a long, slow grind that lasts months, with false recoveries that give you hope before taking you lower. The knowledge that helps before a crash does not always help during one. Understanding the history and living inside the loss are completely different experiences. Holding through it is not about strategy or discipline in the way most people describe it. It is about the psychological difference between an unrealized loss and a permanent one. The recovery is not guaranteed. Survivorship bias is real. What holding through a drawdown requires is genuine acceptance that the money might not come back, not just intellectual acknowledgement of it. The gap between what you think you can handle and what you actually can is the most important thing to understand before you buy Bitcoin. If you are trying to work out how much Bitcoin you can genuinely afford to hold through something like this, the dollar cost averaging video covers the strategy that removes the single entry point problem and makes the position size question more manageable. Watch that next. Stack smart. Stay curious. See you in the next stack.